Hi everyone, welcome to my studio. My name's Chris. It's fall and that means it's time to paint pumpkins. I just completed this painting and I want to share with you all the techniques and the color choices and my step-by-step process for painting this in watercolor. Let's get started. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how I painted this painting in watercolor of a pumpkin. The reference image that I used, you can see here. I found this reference image on unsplash.com and the picture was taken by Aaron Burden. Here I am now sketching out a outline of the pumpkin. I'm just doing this freehand. I'm not really interested in sketching in the background at all or any of that. I'm going to do that more freehand once I get painting. But just going to go ahead and sketch all this in. As I sketch it, let me talk a little bit about my colors and some of my other materials. I'm painting on 140-pound cold press Arches paper. The size of the paper is 6 inches by 9 inches in dimension. And the colors I use, I limited myself to about 7 colors on my palette. I'm using Azo Yellow by M. Graham, New Gamboge by Daniel Smith for my yellow colors. I needed a lot of orange, so I used a Yellow Orange by Magello Mission Gold. And I also needed a fair bit of red in this painting, so I used Quinacridone Rose by Daniel Smith. I used Ultramarine Blue by M. Graham. And Indigo by Daniel Smith, and a little bit of green. In some places I use Cascade Green by Daniel Smith. That's 7 colors. I typically try to limit myself to around 5, but I used a few more in this painting. I'm going to go ahead and speed up this sketching process now. I'm particularly interested as I sketch in just identifying the core shadow in the object, those areas kind of where the line between light and dark is most evident. And of course I'm focusing on some of the other objects. Here I'm putting in the wood, the edge of the wood cart that the pumpkin's sitting in. I'm ready to start painting now. I'm grabbing my Azo Yellow and I'm trying to be really careful here to avoid the highlight areas in the upper right corner of the pumpkin. You can see in the reference image that it's really quite white in that area and I don't want to put any paint there. It's important to retain your highlights whenever you're painting in watercolor. The color of the paper, the white color of the paper has to be your white areas. And so I'm very conscious of that. I'm using a large brush here. I think this is my number 6 Oku quill brush. You'll notice that throughout the painting I used a pretty large brush. I'm trying to be abstract or at least more impressionist in this painting. And I find I can be loose and free and get a more loose approach to my painting if I use the largest brush possible. And so this is pretty big. Now this quill brush has a nice tip to it, so I am able to get into small areas, but it still holds a lot of water and it can put down really large marks if I want to. Bringing in now some of my orange. Again, this is my New Gamboge, which is more of a orangey yellow. Just again, starting with the lightest color of the yellow and then just adding progressively more and more of the darker colors. Trying to use, again, loose and expressive strokes and not bogging down too much in the details. Now, the area below the pumpkin is quite dark, and so if I do get putting down some of this yellow and all down at the bottom below the pumpkin, it's fine because that area is going to become quite dark, but I like to put layers of color because I find that even later on, if I put a darker color, which I will, in the area below the pumpkin, the golden color will still kind of shine through, and it gives it a beautiful iridescent feeling to it. Okay, now I've got a lot more water on my brush, and I'm coming back. I had put in some dabs of the yellow up there, and now I don't want it to be have very hard edges or to be too pronounced, and so I'm loosening up the color up there. I find that I want to keep my backgrounds really simple. I don't want to complicate the background too much, because if I do, it will take focus away from the main subject area of the pumpkin. I mix up my quinacridone rose, Daniel Smith color, in with that new gamboge and yellow mixture. I know I want some real red tones, especially at the bottom of the pumpkin where the darker tones are. And so coming back in while this is still wet, so this is wet on wet paint application, which is going to give me very soft edges. All the colors are going to really flow into one another, creating a soft look. This is the first wash, and so I'm not worried about details. I'm worried about the general color and tone of the areas that I'm painting. Now I can apply somewhat some edges, especially in areas of the painting where the paper is still dry. Of course, if I put paint there, it's going to be more of a hard edge. In the areas where I've already put down some paint, it's wet, it's going to flow much more. Sometimes I like to just stand back and just see what the colors are doing, how they're flowing. They are flowing a bit here. Now I grab some ultramarine blue. Blue and orange are contrast colors, and so when we place them next to each other in our paintings, we can get just some really beautiful juxtaposition of colors that are really beautiful. They just look beautiful next to each other. I've brought that blue there on the left side up really close to the orange yellow that was already there, and you can see how it just charges in, the yellow charges into the blue. I find that very true of that azo yellow. It is a color that really charges into other colors very strongly. I'm fine with that. I love that when that kind of thing happens. I'm grabbing a little now of my Cascade green, which is a bluish green, a multicolored kind of pigment. And I'm just looking for dark areas of the painting that I know will be in shadow. When I put that green up against some of that reddish orange, it's going to create somewhat of a neutral color, because green is a complement to red, and so whenever you mix complements, you're going to get more of a neutral color. And again, I'm doing this wet on wet, so the colors are charging into each other. I always encourage my students to not be in too much of a hurry when you're painting. Go slowly, see what the paints are doing. Watercolor has a mind of its own, and as you put down colors, especially wet on wet, they will react with one another. Now, if you look at the reference picture, the stem of the pumpkin is really quite a bluish tone to it, and so I chose to use my ultramarine blue, the same color I used on the wood slats down below. I'm using now in the stem. I think it's important and really wise to use the same colors in different places of the painting. So the blue of the lower right corner is now going to harmonize with the blue of the stem in different parts of the painting. I'm really conscious of the core shadow here. The right side of the stem is darker than the left side, so I'm putting down a darker color there. And again, I'm still wet on wet. That background area is still very wet. Everything's wet at this point. So I'm careful as I put down this color. If I don't want the color to charge out into other areas, then I'm being careful about where I put it and how close to the other colors I get. Now I'm noticing, I'm looking a little bit into my background. I notice there's other pieces of vegetables, other squash and pumpkins and things in the background. And again, I don't want to draw a lot of attention to the background. So I'm taking up some color, some yellow, some red, and I'm just getting kind of a hint that there are shapes of colors back there. And I'm just putting those in again, wet on wet. And I don't want to be putting in shapes that are too strong with too many hard edges or too distinct, because again, I don't want to draw attention away from the main subject, that main pumpkin. So I'm just kind of looking at the reference picture and some of the shapes in the background. And in a minute now, I'm putting down some colors, and they are rather strong, so I'm coming back with my quill brush now with a lot more water on it and just softening up those shapes that I put down, because again, I'm trying to avoid really strong recognizable shapes or objects. I think that's a mistake a lot of people make in painting, is their backgrounds. They put as much attention and detail into the background as they do their main subject, and then when you look at the painting, you don't really know what to look at, because everything has equal weight, equal distinction, and that just, to me, doesn't work. I've taken my little spritzer bottle there now and just sprayed into some of those areas. Again, this is all because I'm really conscious of not allowing these areas to become too distinct or recognizable. So that's a great trick sometimes. Keep a spritzer bottle with you. And if there's times when you want to soften things or diffuse them a bit more, then just get out that spray bottle and spray. Now, as I proceed with the painting, I'm wanting to emphasize the darkness in the lower right, lower left corners. This is the edge of a box or a carton. In the original painting, it looked more like some wood there. I just want to create kind of a dark frame around my main subject, which is the pumpkin. And so I'm grabbing my ultramarine blue and I'm mixing in that quinacridone rose in areas, getting almost a purpley color in the very far corners. And again, purple is a complement to yellow. I have a lot of yellow in this painting, so I think that purple works well. Again, now coming back along the bottom edge of the pumpkin, the area right below the pumpkin in the corner of that wooden box, the colors are quite dark in there. And I want to have a real mixture of hues, and so I've come back with this quinacridone rose, which is creating a very purpley red, and applying that down in that area. In a sense, negative painting here, because I'm defining the bottom edge of the pumpkin by just going around its edge here. Now off to the right hand side, I'm doing the same thing. This is the quinacridone rose. And the another distinctive aspect to the pumpkin, of course, is its creases, I guess you'd call it, those lines through the pumpkin, and I'm going to emphasize those with this dark color as well. I just kind of stop here and kind of look and see what I want to do next. I like how it's coming together, and again, it's still very diffuse. I'm still just on my first wash, and so things are very wet on wet, and the colors are flowing into each other. Now I've grabbed a little bit of that Cascade Green, I believe there. And I'm just emphasizing some of the lines through and around the stem. I want a very strong, hard edge where the stem hits the pumpkin. Because again, your eye is drawn to areas of greatest contrast. And if I look at the reference image, some of the areas where light areas touch up against dark areas, that would be particularly around the stem at the top of the pumpkin. And so you really want to emphasize that. You don't want to lose the hard edges in those areas. And so that's what I've done. And again, another thing to keep in mind is you see I'm just moving about the painting. I work in one area for a little bit, like the stem, and now I'm, all right, I'm gonna not mess with that anymore. I'm gonna move away into another area. I've gotten my new gamboge, kind of an orangey yellow, and I'm coming back now and emphasizing some of the areas along the creases of the pumpkin. And I also see there's a lot of kind of a golden color, especially down along the middle band of the pumpkin. And so I'm grabbing this yellow gold and just putting that wet on wet again. The painting is drying a little bit. It's not super wet, but it is still damp, those first washes that I put down. And so when I put down this yellow, it does flow into it. Okay, I'm back now with some of my other colors, somewhat of an orangey yellow, and I'm again looking at that background where there are other pieces of vegetable, other squash and things in the back, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to emphasize it a little bit more so that it gets a sense that there are some other pieces of produce in the background. And of course, those pieces of produce, kind of negative painting around them. They have shapes that I want to define here. And in doing that, again, I'm also giving my main subject matter, my pumpkin, a little bit of time to dry and for the paint to settle. And before I continue with it, I see some greens in those background areas, so I put down my Cascade Green, but then again, trying to avoid strong, hard lines, I've come back with a wet brush and just softened those. All right, I'm going to take a little bit of my ultramarine blue here and my quinacridone rose and mixing up, it's a purpley color, combination of those two colors, and I'm just going to put in some more lines that represent the grains of the wood in that box lower right corner. And now I've pretty much reached the end of my first wash. I'm going to let this dry and go away from it for 10-20 minutes and just let it dry, and then come back and work on my second wash. Okay, everything's dry here at this point. And now as I begin to lay down additional colors, I'm really glazing. So glazing is that technique whereby we take transparent watercolor and place it over other transparent watercolor, and one hue and color, the color below will shine through the new paint that you put on top of it, because again, watercolor is transparent, and it gives a really translucent, beautiful feel to the color in the painting, because you're glazing one color on top of the other, and the new color doesn't completely cover up the previous color, but just adds to it. So I first put down that new gamboge, kind of really yellow, and now I've mix that with a little bit of the red that I'm using, and keep adding more and more red, and really looking at that lower third of the pumpkin, which is the darkest area of the pumpkin because it's furthest from the light. And so I'm really, again, using a pretty large brush. I'm still using that Oku 8 or 6, I think it is. It's a fairly large quill brush, holds a lot of water and a lot of pigment as you paint. And I'm trying to use the largest brush possible to get the job done. Most people make the mistake of choosing little tiny brushes and getting in there and, I don't know, little tiny brush strokes to fill an area. And that just doesn't really work very well in my opinion. You can almost see all those little strokes and it gets to be too busy. And I don't like the look. And so I try to use a larger brush if possible. I really love these Oku quill brushes that I got recently. I'll put a link to those in the description below if you're looking for good brushes. I painted this entire painting with the Oku quill, I think the 6, and maybe even the next larger one. And then I also, 6 and 8 I think, and then I also used a silver black velvet brush. This is the one I'm using right here, which I think is my 8. That's the smallest brush I used in the entire painting, is the silver black velvet 8. And except for when I signed my initials there, I used a script or rigger brush. Okay, now again I'm back to the stem, and I want to emphasize the dark side of the stem, which is the right side. I'm using my ultramarine blue, and I've decided to bring in a little indigo. This is the first time I've used indigo. Indigo is a almost black color. It's a blue toned, very dark color. And I put that on the stem, and now I'm going down and taking that same color and dropping it in underneath the pumpkin. Again, I want to create areas of real significant contrast. And so one of the darkest areas of the entire painting is right below the pumpkin in that corner, and also there on that far right side. So there and off on the far left. And so I'm just doing a little negative painting around the pumpkin, emphasizing those dark areas. And I'm using I'm ultramarine blue with a little indigo in it, and really trying to create dark areas. All right, now I'm going to mix up some darker reddish color here, orangey red, and I've decided I need to do a little negative painting around the right side of the pumpkin, because what we have here is we have the highlight area, the white area of the pumpkin in the upper right corner or area of the pumpkin, and it needs to be differentiated from the background. And so I'm providing some contrast between the pumpkin and the background by choosing a muted yellow or orangey color there, and then just painting around that upper edge of the pumpkin. I'm wanting to mix in some other colors here because I see some yellow and some now green. I'm actually decided I would paint a little negative painting around some of those shapes in the background. Again, getting a sense for some of the subtle shapes of these other vegetables in the background. And also decided I think it'd be good to do some negative painting on the upper left corner of the pumpkin as well, because I have the same thing going on there. I have a real white highlight on the upper left side, and I want to distinguish it from its background, so I need to do negative painting. You're not really painting the subject matter in negative painting, you're painting the area around the subject, and that's how we get the concept of negative painting. It's a very, very important concept. You must master if you want to excel in watercolor. You should do some lessons where all you do is negative painting. Again, leaves can be good for that. You don't paint the leaves, you paint around the leaves. You paint the space around the subject. And then the subject emerges from the paper as you do your negative painting. And that's again what I'm attempting to do here. I had put down some green in some areas, so then I took my brush, got it real wet, and just softened the edges of the paint I just put down. Watercolor is also a combination of hard and soft edges. I have areas that are very hard edges where one color stops and another starts, and the edge is very defined. I have that though combined with many areas of very soft edge, and it's really that's another key to learning to paint in watercolor, is learning to define or combine hard and soft edges. Sometimes I'll put down some paint, it'll create a hard edge, and I'll go, okay, that's okay, but I want to soften it as it moves out into the other part of the subject. And so I'll remove the paint from my brush, just get clean water in it, and come back and touch up against the edge I just put down and soften it. And then where that water hits the paint that's on the paper, it will just soften, diffuse, it'll flow out into the water you just applied. Okay, I'm here defining those ridges in the pumpkin a little bit more. I'll continue to work on those, coming back to those several times in this second round of painting. Okay, now I'm looking at that edge on the upper right and deciding that, yeah, I need a little bit more. I liked it. Okay, I kind of was tentative at first, putting down some negative painting on the edge, and now I'm like, all right, yeah, I like this. I'm going to go for it and put down even a little darker color. When I paint, it's kind of I am making decisions as I go. I put something down and I decide if I like it or not, and then, and if I do, then I'll keep going with it. And if not, I might lift it back out and try something different. Okay, so I'm filling that whole area to the right of the stem now with this reddish-orange combination there. Okay, I have Cascade Green on my quill brush again, and I dabbed some of that or applied some of that in the upper left corner, again negative painting around the pumpkin, and now I'm doing the same thing off to the right hand side of the pumpkin. And I like the green mixed in here because again this is fall, kind of fall colors. So we have a lot of orange and yellow, but we also have the green as well. And it really makes a nice contrast up against the reds that are in that area. And again, you can kind of see how I'm defining some shapes, abstracty shapes in the background. Okay, I've mixed up some more of my yellow orange, my Magello Mission Gold color. It's a bit more of a bright orange. And this is a glaze on top of the previous colors. And I just want, as I look at my reference, I feel that I need to, again, emphasize some of this orange through the midsection of the pumpkin. I'm taking some yellow now and on the tip of the quill brush and dabbing that into that orange I just put down, which will flow into the orange. And I'm wanting to not get rid of all of the highlighty areas because those ridges kind of are defined by light areas next to dark areas. And so I'm careful as I put down this color. Okay, at this point I feel like the white stripes that go through that wood box are a little too white in contrast. So I grab, I think I mix up kind of a neutral color. It's, I'm not even sure exactly what I used here. I think it's really just a lot of a neutral color off my, made up of the blue and the reds, kind of almost a grayish color with a little purple tint. And I'm just going over those areas. I don't, again, your eye is drawn to areas of high contrast, areas where white colors or light colors are up against dark colors. And I felt like those white stripes through the blue box were a little bit too strong. So I just want to just wash over those with some other color. Now it's back to the background. And again, a lot of people will say when they watch me paint that, you know, I just, I go back and forth to different parts of the painting again, and I think that's really helpful because again, you want the paint you lay down, you don't want to sit and mess with it too much. You want to put it down boldly and then let it sit and see what it looks like. And so as you're waiting for that to settle and to dry a little bit, then you can work on some other area. Always looking at the reference image and seeing where you need darker tones, darker values. A famous saying is, you know, colors get all the credit, but values do all the work. And I think that's very true. The values, the relative lightness and darkness of the colors you use are much more important than the actual color. So you need to really look, squint your eyes even and go, okay, is that area of the painting dark enough? Are there areas that are too light? And so I'm taking, again, mixing in red with some of my yellow and orange colors and coming back in and once again adding this red really dark. And dark is a very dark value color. Red, most people don't realize what a dark value it has. And so when you put red down, it's going to get, that area's going to be dark, which is what I want because this is the underside of the pumpkin and therefore very dark. And that's going to give your use of dark values, your use of shadows is what's going to give shape to your subject. And so you need to be really aware of your values. Okay, for the rest of this painting process, I think I'm just going to turn off the narration and turn up the music a little bit and just allow you to watch and get a sense for what I'm doing here as I finish out this painting of a pumpkin. Okay, I've made the all-important decision to stop at this point. I like what I have. I like the fact that it is somewhat impressionistic and not super detailed. I like the background. I like the strong contrast of colors. So before I go any further and ruin it, I think I'll just stop right here. If you've enjoyed this video and found the tutorial helpful, please consider subscribing to my channel. If you like this video by clicking the like button, then even more people will see it, and that would be great. I have lots of videos on my channel, tutorials, product reviews, and things like that. So take a look around and see if you can find some resources that'll help you in your watercolor journey. And again, thanks for joining me today. See you next time.